This episode of Gabbing with Gabby is brought to you by the Breeders Direct Seed Company. In my opinion, the Breeders Direct Seed Company is your premier source for clones and seeds, and they are the only place that you can get the Gabby Staten Island collection. So visit Breeders Direct for all your seed and clone needs. This is Gabby, and we're actually going to announce the new name of our show is Your Weed Stories. And today we're joined by Kevin Jodrey from Wonderland Nursery and from the Grateful Head and many other projects. And of course, Sasha, the Slovenian Hobbit, our international correspondent, giving us some international flair. And we're super excited to continue the story with Kevin Jodrey today. We had a great talk, I think it was a week ago, and we weren't able to complete it, so we're doing this again. Anyway, here we go. What is that you're smoking, Kev?
Some cherry pie.
Ooh. Cherry pie is one of my favorites.
Yeah, I love it too, man. It's just good. It's a beautiful plant.
It really is.
For years.
You still have the cut, obviously?
No, actually, no. I shared it out. I did a bunch of breeding with it, so I have it in that form. I'm just trying to, I'm somebody that's collected forever, and there's a point in your life where you just want less plants to have to deal with in your own home.
Yeah, I get it. Unfortunately, that's how we, you got to spread it out enough when you do that, because that's how we lose stuff, right?
Oh, totally. And then you're also, at the same time, to put it into projects, and then you can go play around and go play with the tool.
Try to find it again through the hunt.
Yeah, and like I said, I am. If I have the ability to move the plant, I move it. If you gave it to me and said, Kev, this is for you, you can't share it, nobody can breed with it, I don't want it in the system, then I protect it. And I've always historically done that, which is what's let me access so much shit.
People being able to trust you.
I'm not going to fuck you on the plant, because at the end of the day, I can probably go around you and get it from someone else too. So it's just this gentleman's agreement of if I get it from you and you don't want to touch, then that's where it stays. But I always, my entire career in the game, I've always shared genes. And it's funny, but a long time ago, that shit wasn't popular. People get pissed off because it was, I almost want to call it cultural elitism. This idea that only the special people have the special plants. And I'm like, you don't have to be balling to be special. And once you got the right plant, it ups your quality of life dramatically if you know what to do with it. And so for me, moving really valuable plants into the public, it always pays off because, one, you're doing something that's human. And second, people that you give plants to that are dependent on the plant and have a different relationship, they're the ones that actually hold it for 15 years.
So can I tell you a little story?
Yeah, go big.
While you finish rolling your joint.
I can roll it and talk.
Yeah. So I don't know how much you know about my story, but I had a small little piece of the Chem Dog story. Is I brought it out west. I was the one that got it from Greg, and I drove it out west. And at the time, Greg had told me not to really pass it around.
Totally.
And the only person that I gave it to was Jason, VA Skunk.
Yeah.
And he gave it to one of his partners, Ben from IC Collective.
Yep.
And somehow after that, it really got out. And at the time, not being as mature as I am today and thinking about consequences like you just spoke about, and also the advantages of giving out genetics, I was kind of pissed, that it got out, because, I was selling the Chem Dog for $6,400 a pound.
Oh, totally.
And so
you gotta
getting it
protect
out,
your ends.
right? But what I wanted to tell you is, so it got out. I don't know exactly how it got out, but it got out to the world, and with maturity, I realized that not only was it good that it got out, but that it was responsible for the creation of so many new strains that wouldn't have happened if it didn't get out. So at the time, I was pissed and, had regrets that it had gotten out. But now I realize that was a great thing that happened, and it increased the legacy of the plant. So at a point, there's a time and place where it just needs to get out to everybody.
You because we know we got the Grateful Head, right, which is the idea
Right.
of a repository, and people don't catch that. Like if you're in professional plant breeding, most professional plant breeders can go into a gene bank and get true F1 stock, right? They can get true inbred lines. They can get stock that's derived from two inbred lines, which is a true F1, so they can work on projects. And we don't have that in cannabis. What we have is like really, these loose collections, which I love because they keep things alive during the dark ages of law enforcement raid. And so for me, some of the stuff that I lost because it wasn't just one raid. It was like a raid on us, and then another house gets hit, and so you end up having things lost, and the ability to be able to keep these plants alive, and a lot of it is, I just want to say it's a mark in time. It's like a memory stamp, and so when even if it's no longer what it once was, to you, it's something, like I connect the plants to like that AK-47 bought my house. That OG bought my fucking farm. Like it was that single plant that I multiplied into money that did it. And so I always have this, this relationship mentally, and it's stuff like that it's not even about today's commercial usage. It's just that these things we touched and historically had relationships with. And so I think that the idea of like as many people possible touching the plant, as many people possible moving it around, as long as somebody holds it in its original form, right? And what we know now too is that when we hold plants in original form, I don't give a shit, you scrub them and they don't. You take a plant and you expose it to 30 years of impact, that impact changes the plant. The plant picks that up. And even though when we use the word like genetic drift implies breeding, and it implies you're losing track of the traits of interest that originally were in your lens. And so you're breeding a plant or you're breeding a dog and you're moving slowly away from the traits that you were originally interested in until they're no longer present. So yes, you're breeding the same line without the same traits. That's genetic drift. I'm just talking about like epigenetic influence change, where every time you clone the plant, every time it's sprayed with a product, every time it's gone through some cycle, subtle change, and
Degrading.
And modifies itself. And like a really good example is, and I did this years ago, and I was talking to somebody about it, but I had a whole OG collection, right? And I'm running all of them, so I know exactly they are not the same plant, right? They are definitely flowering time, profile, just all the different factors that you would say, hey, side by side, the shit's not the same. But when we DNA them, they all came out as Josh D OG, Ghost OG, right? So they all came out as this original. And so the theory was that's all S1, right? They're all S1s. But the truth of it was that when we really went into the DNA analysis, they were all Ghost OG. And me and the science team are arguing about it because they're all the same. We're just calling them different things. And I'm like, yeah, but as a grower, they're definitely not the same thing because the traits are radically different. But the DNA doesn't lie. And someone online I was talking to the other day, a scientist out of Europe, was like, DNA doesn't lie, but it also, sometimes it's hard to get the truth out of it because we have to understand how to really look at what we're seeing. And it was this theory that when we talk about why plants have changed over time, and so many of them have, it's who held it and how was it held. And that's why you have so many variations of all the similar same plants. It's this cut of that plant. And the truth of it is it's the exact same plant, but it's slowly modified after 2, 3, 4, 500 clonal cycles.
Can I respond to that?
Yeah.
How about, like, this is an example. Let's say we could clone a human.
Mm-hmm.
And so let's say there was a clone of Gaby Staten Island or Kevin Jodrey, and it was completely identical. But one of these clones took care of himself differently. Okay? Maybe one Gaby Staten Island eats nothing but McDonald's and Coca-Cola and fast food and doesn't exercise. And then there's another one that eats a healthy meal, a healthy diet and exercises. When they're both 90, they're both going to look dramatically different.
Totally.
And they're going to say, "Oh, these aren't the same people," but actually the DNA is the same. Right?
Yes.
When you look at the DNA is not going to tell
deviation.
you. Right.
Subtle
The DNA is not going to tell you how you were cared for.
Nope.
As you go through your years, and that's going to have an effect on the body of a human or the body of a plant. Correct.
Totally. And we were also, the conversation was about where did a lot of these profiles, why have they diminished? Why are they no longer so extraordinary? And I take a look and I'm just like, I said, I don't think that it's so much any kind of procedural change, because that would be easy to fix. If you were working with your plant and you noticed a change in the quality of it from crop to crop, you'd be like, wait a second, I'm going the wrong way with my process. You typically wouldn't improve it. And so if your drying method becomes more scientific and your quality decreases, you go back to more by feel, right? As a grower, you're flexible with what you do. But and I think it's the age of chemical cannabis, that when we really started to focus on pesticides and insecticides and growth regulators, you started to change the metabolic pathways of the plant, because the plant no longer had the need to produce those metabolites. So it started to slowly shut off that production route. And over the course of 20, 30 years, and all the fuels are the ones that you really see a lot of this in terms of, they were so heavily covered in these adulterants that over the course of 30 years of doing it, they just stopped producing what's not needed. And then the issue is, someone's like, you scrub it, right? So I thought if we scrub it, we go back to zero. But no, we go back to the zero of that day. We don't go back to when it came out of the seed, right? It's a nice idea, but all you're doing is cleaning up the plant, but you're not cleaning up the epigenetic change. TC doesn't fucking scrub the genes. It allows you to outgrow a pathogen, but it doesn't undo what we've done. So, I love TC. I think it's probably one of the best tools you could possibly have for, modern day cannabis, because we have so many different issues that are spread through conventional propagation now, because we have all these different ag forms touching us. And so for the first time ever, herb is touching everything, because its location spread from a closet to a field to the Central Valley, and now you're in the middle of some of the largest ag production zone on Earth. The cross-contamination is unreal. But regardless, you still have to do the best you can to hold the stock. And it's the same thing with like landrace preservation, where the minute you take it out of the country of origin, you're not really doing landrace preservation, but you're preserving what you can. So I don't think, because someone said, when you're trying to do what you're doing, Kev, you're not doing anything. I said, well, I kind of am, though, because really what the goal is to get people to be aware of stock that's not what we would call domesticated, to get people to be aware of other cultures that produce cannabis in other forms, and to be able to get access to that material. And that's the part of the preservation that's really occurring. But the idea of preserving that material in its true form can only be done in its true form. So like Colombia would have to do its own preservation, gene protection. California, we don't have any native stock. We would just work with what we have. But Pakistan, Afghanistan, India, Lebanon, place Colombia that's had, 400 or 500 years of cannabis in place, that's where I think that the preservation has to occur. But since we don't have control of that, we do the best we can. So we work limited populations, ideally, you know, it'd be like Sam was saying, you know, 10,000 is the population you want, where you have full open population of 10,000 interbred. That gives you enough genetic capture to say that you've captured the qualities of a gene pool for future preservation. Nobody's doing 10,000 fucking plants on a preservation. It's just impractical. You know, we don't have that ability.
Most people are doing 10 or 20 seeds and think that that's getting it down.
And they're picking breeding, and sometimes it works. If you know, the outliers always emerge. I think that a good story for people is Super Boof, right? Where the guy that does Super Boof came out of 2 10-packs, right? So he buys a pack of seeds of one, buys a pack of seeds of the other, selects out a male and a female, puts them together. He gets leaf strain of the year. And that's just phenomenal. But now people will see that and say, I too can do this. And you're like, maybe.
Right, maybe.
Maybe, you know, it doesn't always work. And sometimes you can go through 100,000 seeds, and if the alleles aren't present that contain that information, that shit isn't moving forward. If you don't get if you know, you can have one copy and then a mutated copy. If you're not, if the copy's not present or they're both mutant, that's done. You just don't have that information to move forward. So I think that we do the best we can, but a lot of it is private people that do banking. And you know, you're one of them. I'm one of them. You save plants too, Sash?
Of course, I'm a librarian. You know, I have a facility in Austria where we have 35 different cultivars in preservation form. You know, we're cloning moms traditionally. We're gonna do tissue culture in the future. So that is our perspective of it. You know, I'm following you since many years, since you did Wonderland Nursery. I saw the videos where you were in the nursery, you know. And before I wanted to ask you, because you were talking about this genetic drift, I remember very clearly that you were talking about Louis the 13 OG Kush in one video. And you were showing the plant, and you were talking about that you were doing bokashi and grokashi techniques to bring it back because it was kind of sick, because these people that brought you this plant brought you a sick plant, actually. So you tried to actually, is it still alive? I mean, do you still...
Yeah, the Louis is alive, and it got moved into the system. The thing with the Louis was the Louis came out of a group of Armenian brothers in Los Angeles. And out of some crazy coincidence, I help out their mother-in-law, right? Like, she's just an older lady, she's nice, and I'm just nice to her one day. And I help her out with the problem, and she gives my phone number to her son-in-law. And he hits me up and he's like, "Hey, I'm this dude." And so he rolls up in a Range Rover with his crew. They all hop out in suits and they hand me a couple clones and say, "These will change your life." And I was laughing because I already had a whole OG collection, right? So it's just one more OG.
Yeah.
But it was this beautiful thought, and it was a thanks, and I was just grateful because it was like so pure. Where you helped out our mother-in-law, we're going to help you with the ability to make money. And the issue was what we had discovered with like Hop Layton, because like, remember, I've been doing this shit for a long time, so like when Hop Layton pops up, we're all getting fucking hammered by it because none of us really know. We know there's some kind of mutation, but we don't understand what it is. But I get lucky in that I get a team of scientists that come to me, and out of SoCal, Central Cal, and Humboldt, and this cat named Rick Crum, a PhD geneticist named Rick Crum, says, "Hey, what we have is we've discovered some kind of pathogenic problem. We don't understand it. We don't have a name for it right now, but we know what it's doing. We understand what it's doing to the plant, but we just don't know what it is. And we wanted to see if you wanted to play around with the project." And I was like, "I'm down." I said, because I was having a conversation with this guy named Alan Atkinson, who was from the Probiotic FArmers Alliance, right? Him and Mike had created the alliance. And Alan's background was in silage, fermentation, anaerobics. And so he had this belief that if we returned the system back to this anaerobically driven, low oxygen environment, which is really what Earth is, right? It's very low O2. And when I had this discussion with Elaine Ingham, because Elaine Ingham came to visit me after she saw this, so we could kind of understand how do you define low oxygen? And it's really like this just line of ppm, how many parts per million are present. So she was like, if you don't have, oxygen driven compost tea, it won't work. And I showed her Alan's sub irrigation system, and she realized that there's like this gray area that's in between anaerobics and aerobics. And it just becomes this determination of what do you define as low or no oxygen. And what Alan's deal was that he believed that if you put a plant back into this sub-irrigation system and you allowed it to naturally, drive its function, we should see a return to homeostasis. So he has a hypothesis, right? And I said, all right, let's see if we can turn it into a theory. Let's try to prove the hypothesis. And I end up getting that plant from the lab, and it's infected, and we know it. So we put it into isolation. I put it into that system. And over the course of like 45 days, it basically just sat still. I mean, because it was heavily impacted. And impacted would imply, in this case, it was a Girl Scout cookie cut. It came from an operation that used to have 100% strike rate. It went down to like 3% strike rate. So out of 1,000 clones, they were getting 30.
No way.
Like, yeah, just low.
Wow.
And so they said, hey, we know this is impacted. This is what the impact is. Let's see if we can do it. So I take it and I put it in the system and I sit it in this chamber. And it just sits. And all of a sudden I started to see like the surface cracking, and you could see new cambial material forming, like these lines coming up. And as this new cambial material was creating, it was shedding all its old leaves and new leaves were appearing. And once I had this new formation, I cut those clones and they all rooted, and then I put them under light to grow them up. But I stressed one side of a tray because it was getting too much light exposure for its age, and it re-triggered the hop latent. And because I had the lab constantly testing everything, we were like, whoa. So that was when we discovered that if you can keep a plant in some form of homeostasis, a natural balance, the hop latent doesn't seem to be an issue. It can work with it. Doesn't mean it won't transmit it, but it didn't affect its secondary metabolite production.
Doesn't that also depend on the viral load?
Production by weight.
Doesn't that also depend on the viral load? Like if there's a low viral load, it's not going to impact it very much?
It does. But these plants were covered. So they had high load. They were absolutely falling apart, which was, let's try. Because they didn't understand that the degree of they're brilliant guys, but you got to remember, it's the dawn of this problem. Right? So same thing with like russet mites and shit like that, where people be like, you had russet mites. I'm like, well, who the fuck didn't? Nobody knew we had them. We had to go buy a microscope to identify the problem because there was no predecessor before us to identify it. So when you're in an industry and you're first, right? You're doing this at speed. You're gonna catch all the problems, and it's interesting because when you get into science, it's the same for them. Just because they're brilliant and they have every tool known to mankind doesn't mean they understand the problem they just discovered. So we're trying to figure out, is this something you can work with? And when I stressed those plants, the ones that got stressed reverted, and the ones that didn't. And I was like, whoa, I got you. All we have to do is add some stress load to the organism, and the viroid reemerges. So we knew that you could have plants that appeared completely clean, but without testing, you weren't aware you were passing the viroid forward because your operation wasn't overly stressing the plant. And on the ones that were understressed, meaning they were, kept with the balance, the strike rate went right back up to 100%. So we went right back up to 1,000 out of 1,000 on the plug. So it worked well for them, but it let me understand how plants respond and how we impact these issues. So when I got that box in, and I already had the cut from on the Louis, I put it in that system to see if I could do the same thing. Could I get it to return back to like an original state? And it kind of did the same thing. It changed, and it became a beautiful plant again. And then I shared that out into the public, and so a bunch of different people have it. Alan still runs it. A couple local farms still use it as their component. If you got a copy of that, you probably had to have got it from me, because it was nobody that was. It was an in-house OG held by a group that did not share the cut because it was super valuable at the time.
I have
Like
a
the
cross
Chem
of
Dog.
it, in my facility. We have a cross of it. It's called Zafts. I don't know how you Americans call it, but it's ZAWTZ. It's from Compound, It's a breeder cut from Chris. And it's Louis the 13 OG cross to Skittles.
Totally. And they
gelato,
might have got that, like when Node first started. Node and Conception, basically, the majority of the plants that they put into the system came from me. So, like, when Node lit up as an operation, it was through my collection that they mined the majority of that original stock before they built the relationship with Chris, right? So you got Chris Lynch, who was Compound, who then merges with Node, that becomes Compound, then they have a fallout. But before all that took place, when Node first lit up, we were all going to work together, and they came over and harvested a tremendous amount of material from us to begin the project. So I'm not saying he definitely got it from me, but there's some plants that I know without a question that shit was not in the system till I put it in the system. And
but it's a nice feeling, right?
It's critical.
It's a nice feeling.
You have
nice
to,
feeling.
yeah. You gotta put the genes in so that people can play. And at the end of the day, it's just about interest, right? If you can spark interest in people, and there's always a plant that's like mythological unicorn in your mind that if you could get your hands on this, your whole world would be better, right? That's a beautiful thing. And sometimes when you get the plant, the hype is bigger than the reality, and you're like, it's a plant. Then other times you get a hold of something and you're like, wow, this is gorgeous. I would love to smoke this every day for the next 10 years. And you don't know. You just don't. And so the idea, though, is to create the excitement and to get people to be curious. And then a lot of it is, for the older crowd, which I'm one of them, it's this idea of like trying to go back in time and touch things from our youth, because so much of it's gone. But like I said, it changes.
That's
and
the
we
next
had this discussion about sour. We had this about sour diesel and all that. Which one is yours? And I'm like, the good one. Because when I ran 20 different ones side by side, that's the one that stood out. Do I really give a fuck what the name is at this point? No. Because and even from the dudes that held the shit, half of them lost the shit. You've been in the game long enough, you got raided. Your fucking plants vanished. Then you got to get plants back from someone else. The minute that shit leaves your hand and goes to anybody else, maybe it comes back the same. Sometimes it comes back better. Some people actually, they're holding them in naturally lit spaces. You got them in supplementally lit greenhouses. You're running them under biological drive to keep them healthy. But the plants that you selected originally were under light and chemical and rock wool, and that's why you selected the plant. So, like, the idea that every plant is better biologically sun-grown is not true, because the selection was done under artificial light with chemical, right? So I'm like, it's the impact of everything together that creates that equation, and people have to understand it. That, some of the, I swear to God, some of the best OG I ever smoked in my life came out of Todd McCormick's Rockwool Block. So, he's got the original OG, but when we were smoking it at his house, I was like, God damn, Todd, that's some really good OG Kush. And you couldn't deny it. And I had some sun-grown SFV that was cracking, but it had an influence that was a little different than what my memory was of OG, because OG was all originally indoor-driven.
Yeah, true. I wanted to respond to that by mentioning a comment that Michael Wolf Siegel made in the last podcast we recorded, and he talked about how there's, I believe he said, 8 terpenes or 6 terpenes that will never be found on indoor cannabis because the UV light isn't there, unless you're supplementing, I believe he said, with like UVB, which most people aren't going to do. So when you talk about the way certain stuff tastes, if it was sun-grown or indoor grown, you're not going to have that UV, and then you might not have those terpenes, which is what you remember as, the flavor profile of that strain.
And the lack of, because remember, they're all, you're making something, right? We're going to use it like cooking, right? You're gonna make a dish. Sometimes what you added or what you didn't add creates the quality. And so when you're talking about anything to do with secondary metabolite profile and influence, when you're looking at like hop testing is pretty comprehensive, more comprehensive than cannabis because there was no illegality to it, right? But when you're looking at hop testing, you can take two identical hop cultivars that have a single ppb difference in one metabolite, part per billion, and you'd swear to God they were two radically different animals. And we're talking everything lines up flawlessly except one metabolite at part per billion. And so our ideas of like looking at a COA is like, this is telling me something. It's not telling you shit. It's telling you what they want you to know, but that doesn't mean that that's what you need to know.
It's good that we're gathering some information, but it doesn't tell us the whole picture.
No, because at the end of the day, right, what about moonlight? Because moonlight's its reflection, how does that bent spectrum influence it? And so when I got lucky that I'm not a fucking scientist. My mother was, right? And so I'm always really clear about what a scientist is. It's extremely focused, prove it, multiple locations kind of thing. But it lets you understand that science is as powerful a tool as there ever was, but it's not omnipotent. It doesn't understand everything until it's able to really kind of rip it to pieces. And I got brought in to do the LED development for Heliospectra when they first lit up as a business, and they came into North America. I got selected as the person with the operation they wanted to do the trials with, which was unbelievable because it was the first really tunable LED plates. You could do anything with them. They were like 15, 16 grand a plate at the time, right? Whoa. Full iPad control. I mean, shit that they're talking about now, that shit was in 208, right? So in 208, the company flies in, the president flies in, team of scientists fly in, we set up the test operation. I'm running the same cultivar, but under their system and then under my system, side by side. And the part that was fascinating was that the level of light engineers they brought in were brilliant. And there was a woman out of the UK named Tessa Babcock that she worked for the Bill Gates Institute. And she was making sure that I understood that it's the information that the sun provides via these frequencies that we don't understand. So she's just like, look, she goes, I'm working for the Bill Gates Institute. She goes, it's fucking unlimited money. She goes, there's nothing but super geniuses in the room. She goes, I'm telling you, we barely understand what's taking place from sunlight. We really don't understand. So what we do is we do the best we can to create an effect. And by using steered tuning, it allows us to do some interesting stuff. And the example was it was on basil, right? The plant. And it was pertaining to certain countries like different leaf shape. They like different length and elongation. All they do is dial in the spectra to make that occur. She says, all of these that you're looking at, she says, I'm showing you all these basil samples. She goes, it's all the same shit. She goes, we adjust the morphology through spectral tuning, which makes the country happy. It's kind of like motor oil. The Americans like golden oil, Japanese like green oil, right? So when you buy motor oil in Japan and you pour it into your car, that shit comes out green. When you pour motor oil into your car in America, that shit comes out gold. It's because Americans believe that golden oil is clean oil and it's good oil, and Japanese believe that green oil is good oil. It's an additive, right? It has zero to do with viscosity or any of those shear factors, anything that implies fluid dynamics under tension, right? Under pressure and heat. It's purely about what people like and what they don't like. And that's what was so fascinating with, the indoor world to me, and the tuning and the adjustment and the focus. It's just that if you're using these things to hold things long term, over the course of 15, 20 years, you have to have change. And so it's this reality that it helped me understand that like I was chasing skunk for fucking ever because I had this massive collection of it. So I for whatever reason, I was just really about it. So I had acquired a collection of plants that all had a really, really similar aroma profile, but very different morphological traits. And so I said, and I lost them in a raid in like early 2000. And then the mom room that we had as a redundant mom room, it got hit in an armed robbery. And the idiots that robbed the spot thought it was a grow house. They didn't realize it was a mom bank. So when they came in, there was no flour. So they, armed robbery, fucking family gets held at gunpoint. They take the moms and shit. And it was done, right? We lose that stock. So I go back into the world to see if I can find it. And I'm digging and I'm digging and I'm digging. And it wasn't that like I'm going to be the discoverer of it. It wasn't about a public, like it has to be Kev. It was that I was excited about looking for something that used to exist. And when you share hunts with people, in a lot of regards, it inspires people to hunt their own shit. Not just to chase that, but to chase what you wanted. You wanted, I want the old Piff cut I got way back in the day because none of these have that, what do you call it, the bathroom test where you walk in the bathroom and the shit's still hanging in the air 10 minutes after you burn a joint. It's that. It's the chase. And I don't care what population I went through. And this created this whole online shitstorm about people saying, I got the real shit. And I'm like, well, if somebody's got the real one, break the fucking thing out so that somebody can at least enjoy it. And we haven't seen it. So there's skunky and there's things, but it's just, I couldn't find it. And I got to a point where I just stopped looking because I got tired of digging in the gene pool. Like, someone said, did you find it? I said, no. I said, I dug for years. I went through all these populations from out of the country. I went through old populations that I was digging through. I couldn't find it. I found stuff that was really aromatic, and I had a skunk out of like 1981, like old skunk out of the hills of Humboldt, ancient, held forever, but it didn't have that we would say skunk piss profile, but its thiol level was insane, and when you cut a clone off of it, it would basically fill a building with that musky, deep aromatic, make you kind of almost sweat when you experienced it. But a different direction that I was seeking. I wanted that noxious, skunk urine. And I couldn't do it. And then one day I just realized it was okay, that maybe that was just what it was, and that it was a memory, that I had an experience once long ago that I enjoyed for a long time. And when it was done, it was done. And I started to see plants almost like people that you hung out with, that you really enjoyed hanging out with, and they passed away. You're not going to go and replace that person. You're not going to go find a new buddy, new family member, a new anything that is that. You're gonna get different things, and you need to learn to appreciate different things and just be grateful you got to experience it when it was in your hands.
Kevin, is this the videos that show you drawing like a line, and then you say this is the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and then you make these circles, right? You make these circles.
Yes, it's spheres of influence.
Yeah.
It's if we can get back far enough and open up the population, what do we get into? Mm-hmm. Because every time we hybridize or move the plant forward, and that's genetic drift, did we lose the traits of interest that we originally were so attracted to? And you see it in I'm fascinated by dogs because I'm a dog freak at heart, right? But it's doing development on a dog, and then there's specific things of interest, and as you bred, you lost track of the traits, and you weren't doing the job you needed to do with evaluating the progeny, the children, to make sure that those things were being carried forward. And what happens is they call it like paper breeding, where you're looking at the animals via a chart, or you're looking at plants via a chart, and the chart lets you understand where it came from, but it doesn't necessarily tell you what is imparted from that plant or that dog in its subsequent breeding application. So just because it came from something doesn't mean it contains the shit you want. So yeah, it's Super Skunk from Sensi, but that profile you wanted isn't in that pack. So you can run that shit because people. That's the illusion that you open up a population, everything's present. You can go back. You can't. If those genes aren't present, that shit isn't there. You're not going to have them just appear from nowhere. So I think that it's the people of today will experience it in the same way with the things that were really prevalent and popular for them. I was making a joke about, the legacy gelato cut because people love gelato. If they didn't love it, it wouldn't have been it's kind of like Skittle, right? It's a profile that people really, really like. Give it 30 years and people will want to go back to that legacy Skittle cut. And after 30 years, is it still tasting like powdered Tang? The astronaut drink, right? And it might not. And then people will say, oh, it was way better. And they'll be like, oh, you're old, you're reminiscing, your memory's off, you're incorrect. And they'll be screaming, no, I know. And that's us. We're screaming, no, it was better. And people like, you're old and your memory's failing. Well, it was. That rendition from that time was better than today, even though we have the most grow knowledge. The amount of information we have about how to cultivate cannabis right now is insane. You couldn't have any more fucking knowledge because you had so much money in interior development, so much money in exterior development, and then now you have science that can access it via hemp. Holy shit. Like, we've never been smarter, but it doesn't change the fact that you're not going to resurrect shit that isn't there. It's just done.
You made a comment the last time we talked about how the U.S. and Australia had the least amount of experience growing cannabis in comparison to, like Pakistan and these other countries that they've been growing it for thousands of years. But it made me think of something. And does that mean that because you have less experience in years that you have less knowledge, right? Because, I used to own a grow shop in Willits, and there'd be, old timers that would come up and say, well, we've been doing it like this for 20 years. Right, but if you've been doing it wrong for 20 years, or if you haven't continued to learn for those 20 years, that doesn't actually mean that you have more knowledge. So I guess my question for you was, do you think that even though we have the least experience here in the U.S., that we have the least knowledge? Because I think a lot of people would certainly think that we've got the most knowledge when it comes to cannabis cultivation.
I don't know about that one. I don't know. I mean, if we're talking about indoor development, you're definitely not talking anything against Holland.
Right.
I mean, when I study greenhouse work, that's all plant empowerment. That's all Dr. Wheel. That's all But
Dutch. If we're talking cannabis specifically,
but that's pretty
Holland
much.
is a very small country.
It is.
Like California is far bigger than
their agricultural approaches. If you're not following that approach, you basically go in the wrong route. Like, I mean, they're the ones that really determine, like, leaf temperature is what drives the whole process, right? So, like, so much of the information we have came out of that area. So, do I think Americans aren't talented? Oh, hell no. And do I think that just because you've done something for a long time, does it make you smarter than someone else? Not necessarily. But if you have a population of plants that are present that have been naturally selected through environmental pressure, then that means you got 2,000 years of data in the plant. Where for us, our whole world has been so erratic that it broke these custodial chains and it truncated the populations. We got down into very bottleneck populations, very specific. So I think what we did is, when I say that we have the least amount of time, it means we have the least amount of time for the plant to acclimate. So U.S. cannabis, especially because of the war on drugs, and I used Australia too, because it's the same thing. It's these two places seem to have the last on the cannabis food chain. Mm-hmm. And it's not a knock to either place. I mean, it really isn't. But it's just a statement of fact that if your family lived in an area for 50 years and their family lived in an area for 2,000 years, I would assume your relatives and you should have higher adaptation to that specific. I just know that my family's all like Eastern Northern Europeans, right? then we live in New England on the coast for same house for like 320 years. What I know is that when I hang out with my friends, there's not one of them that I'm not warmer than, right? Where like I'm wearing a t-shirt in the winter, everybody else is wearing a fucking down coat. I seem to do really well in cold weather. And I don't even necessarily like it. It's just that I seem to be able to handle it different, right? So I just know that I've adapted to that cold ass Eastern European climate. Then my family moves in to New England, where we're on the coast of Maine for fucking 3 centuries. I think that I've adapted subtly to be able to deal with that temperature better. You know, I don't get suntan. I have to wear like, you know, and I work in the sun, but I have to wear a hat and I got to wear, you know, some sun clothes, or otherwise I'll still get a good burn even at 60 years old. My body hasn't had enough adaptation. But if I lived in Africa and I bred, and my children bred, and you go 2,000 years, some of them are going to have higher melanin content, and they're going to definitely have an adaptation to it. So I think that that's what occurred. It's not that we're not bright or the Australians aren't bright. It's not to say that, you know, anybody's. I always give the Dutch credit because almost every single thing you touch is Dutch. You know, like Wolf may have came out with the Sea of Green with cannabis, but the idea of stacking plants in density was not foreign to agriculture before that. And it's not to knock Wolf, because
No, of course not.
I know Wolf and I respect him. He's a brilliant guy. But the reality is, so much of these things that we do come from, you know, other methodologies. For me, like, you know, I went heavy into sub-irrigation, right? And sub-irrigation was how I ran all the operations, because it allowed you to be able to flood beds and control the soak and then the reflow back. That was all taken right out of Dutch ag. But I would just do it in large diesel-driven buildings. You know, we would custom build the tables, because fucking ag tables didn't exist. You couldn't buy a pre-made table. So I had a carpenter I worked with, and we drew up a blueprint, and then I would fiberglass the tables. And then when I wanted to do a project, I just let him know, hey, I need 22 tables. And then he would be able to go get the cut list, go purchase the material, assemble the tables, glass them, and I would go pick them up in trucks and bring them up to the operation. So, you know, we would using tools from other countries, because those things weren't readily applied. At that time, you could get like a 3x3 table, because that was like the original plastic table, was like the Sun Systems and
the American hydroponics up
yeah,
in
they were in
near
Arcata, not far. So I knew Gennaro, he's passed away, but I knew his kids, and Michael was the other guy, Christensen, right? And so I knew him from the store, but we weren't friendly. Gennaro was a little cooler in some regards, and I knew Gennaro's kids. But the 3x3 tables just didn't grid out right, because those were designed for solar systems, spins, lower intensity light. Where what I wanted was to stack thousands over 16 square feet, so that I could get what I wanted, which was quicker cyclical time, heavier yield per square meter. And so we just custom built the tables, but all that stuff was stuff that I was learning going to college for plant propagation. So once I really started to, you know, dig into where the knowledge came from, shit. I mean, between Israel is giving you all your science on cannabis predominantly, right? Most of the deep research on profiles and molecular weights all coming out of Israel. And the Dutch are giving you pretty much, you know, almost every greenhouse has some, it has to. They're the ones that did all the work. But what we did is we took cannabis and turned it into this cult. Before it was a product that was in countries. Once it got to the U.S. turns it into a cult. And because the U.S., and like that's my opinion, but the U.S. has the ability to do something most countries don't, which is project that shit into the world through the media. So the U.S. is what really hyped up so much of this stuff. And then if you take a look at the internet kind of goes along, and you see like OG Kush was one of the first things spoke on the internet. Girl Scout cookie was like, to me, the first plant that was really exploded through the internet, because that was the only way people could still access. And so I was never big on forums. I was on a couple of them and I'd check them out. But for a lot of the forum cats, it was a community that they needed because they didn't have one in their lives because they were too hidden. But all those years from, for me, from 25 to 58, almost 60, I've been in Humboldt County where that shit wasn't hidden. So every single one of your neighbors was sparked up. Everybody around you was sparked up. So what it did is it allowed you a different type of relationship where you didn't feel like you were on your own, living in a vacuum. Whereas if you were on the East Coast, Midwest, places like that, you really didn't have an ability to ever kind of come out and talk about weed publicly. You had to use the forums.
Even living in Sonoma County, it was like that.
What's that?
I said, even living in Sonoma County, it was like that. So
totally, yeah, because Sonoma's different. Sonoma's, right. you have, so Humboldt's an out-of-control outlaw county in terms of like, fuck you, we're going to go big. Radically different. I would say Mendo is way more craft. It's the same thing with Sonoma. They're more craft-orientated. Mendo was more craft-orientated. Humboldt was go as big as you possibly can. That there was no limit. There was just no limit. That bigger was better. Bigger was okay. That wrapping yourself in money was not a bad thing. And so Humboldt was different. Like people talk about what's the legacy strains of Humboldt County, and I'm like, whatever one sold. Because the minute that shit was moving in velocity, those cuts were here and being produced, and that product was leaving and feeding the country. So Humboldt was different, but it allowed, just like right now, I'm online, but not to the degree a lot of people are, because I'm actually able to work in the world.
You have other resources.
Oh, totally.
For a lot of people, the only resources they have is what they can find online.
Yep, and I think it's a lovely thing, and I think what it's done is it's created, it has a duality. You're living on the online world, that's your community, that's what's right, because it's you, it's we get centered. It's like you don't really have, I would say, an open idea mentally, because no matter what, you're looking at it through your eyes. So no matter what you do, you're filtering information through your biases, and it's just what we naturally do. It's human. Anything different than you, your sensors tell you be wary, and that's a survival instinct, right? But when you develop it, and that becomes true and real, we had this discussion the other day. It's the idea about, like, we use the word craft. I gave a lecture on craft. So what I did is I interviewed a bunch of people on what is craft and their opinion. So I asked them, what's craft? And then I asked them, and how do you grow? And each person, their method fit their identity, right? Like, craft is what I do. It's only by hand. And I said, and how do you grow? Only by hand. And the other person was, craft is these things because they use drippers. Craft is only indoor and living soil. No. Craft is understanding how to dry back a block to get the best expression. Each individual had identical reflection of their work into their identity. And that was my point of that lecture, was that craft is wild and free. It's anything you want it to be, and it's not your intent, because intent doesn't do shit in life, because what they say, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. It's about what happens from the intent. It's the actual experience of the person you're trying to create. So you can't define that you're a craft operator if everyone who smokes your product says it sucks. You know?
That's true.
It's not fucking craft, right? Just like, be really clear. Craft is a Germanic word, right? K-R-A-F-T. And it really implies by hand. And the craft, and that's like an 1850 word, right? It comes out at the same time the arts and crafts movement comes out, which was this fight back against the industrial era. So the industrial era is emerging. All this cheap shit's being produced. And this group emerges and says, that's not what we want. And what people didn't understand was that arts and crafts craft movement wasn't about this really high-end shit you looked at the wall. It was a screwdriver that had a really beautiful handle. It was a hammer that when you held it, you wanted to hold it. It was
craftsman tools.
Yes. It was about things you use daily, frequently, but at a higher level, because those are the things that had gone through mass production, had changed. And the reason why that whole craft movement worked was they had a craft like symposium that was held, and it exposed people to it. So from 1850s, 1860s, all the way up until the Great Depression, this craft movement kicked ass. And I researched it originally because I used to do fine woodwork as a hobby. And I started getting into architecture in terms of like studying periods. And there was this craftsman era in homes at that turn of the century that was about, and it returned again later in time. It returns again in the 2000s, where it was this change to go back to smaller homes with higher quality details, where a bigger house wasn't more important than a better door handle, than a better sink, than the elevation of the rooms in terms of ceiling height to change the feel. So taller heights give you more expansive thinking. Shorter heights make you feel more secure. And so it's adjusting the ceiling heights and spaces. It's the lighting. It's the feel. It's the detail. It's you're doing woodwork and highlighting this artistic expression versus what became known as the McMansion, which was these cardboard houses that were fucking caverns. And everybody's like, look at my cavernous house. But you go to touch the door handle, and it's a cheap door handle, and you feel it. So the thing you touch every day is the doorknob, and the doorknob sucks. So we kind of returned back into this craft world for people who had the money to buy the McMansion, but wanted more of this internal stimulation from the things they touched and did. And so when I was doing all this work on craft and just trying to understand the argument, because each one of us constantly says, what's the definition of craft? It's an acre tops. It's no drip systems. It has to be sun-grown, biologically driven to be craft. And it drove me into really researching. I'd done all this wine research for the Appellation project that I had helped work on. And it was the same thing. It comes down to, how do you view a thing, and do people view it the same? And so, there's going to always be this dissension, and it's just kind of what it is. And so I just say, look, if you're somebody that is living right now and you're 19 years old and you're smoking your favorite shit, you might want to just hold on to that plant and hold on to it for emotional sake, but just realize in 30 years, the odds of it being the same plant you smoked when you were 19 is probably pretty low. Yes, similar, but subtly different. And even with TC scrub, because the thing is, the plant, if you wanted to return to the norm, you'd have to go back to the parents, and you'd have to have them in the same situation they were in when they did the work, because they're passing that information on to the progeny. So there's always change. Even in Pakistan, when I went to all the villages, I was like, what's your like native stock at your village? And they said, we really don't have any, Kev. What we do is we constantly share material with other villages around us, and stock that'll come in from Afghanistan will move in. I got partners that are Iranian, my partner's Iranian, his family still lives in Iran. They cross the border and grow dope in Afghanistan and then bring the seeds back into Iran and then ship the seeds. So I got a bunch of seed stock that got moved via that route to me. But it's their selection, what they wanted, what the market wants, and then they narrow the population. That is a change. So like what I learned is that there's no way to preserve any of this unless you can preserve like a good seed batch of that original material, and you're able to preserve it in some kind of repository where it's held at the right moisture, it's held at the right temperature. You're doing germination testing, and once you get to a certain level of germination failure, you have to do another repopulation of it. And so that's where really, like Australia and the US, where we're the last in line. We have some of the stricter laws on cannabis. I mean, shit, you know how much a pound in New Zealand's going for right now? Almost $9,000. So New Zealand, and I started laughing. I said, I'm flying to New Zealand. You know what I'm saying? I'm like, fuck. I think I can hide a couple pounds in the tree. So, you get, you 3 pounds, you're talking 27K. That's pretty interesting. So the the restrictions are still so dominant in so many places. It just changed, and I just think that people just need to be aware of that. That's just kind of what it is, and I don't think I have some handle on this. I just know that no matter where I go and what I dig into, you see shift, and it's okay. It's okay that the things are different than they once were. They can't be the same as they always were. Lobster is small. When I was a kid, a lobster would lay across your table. I was from my whole town that I lived in, the village, right? Was all commercial fishermen, right? There'd be the dragon, either doing shellfish, which is quags and clams, or you doing lobster and crab, right? So I grew up
Yeah.
eating lobster so much that it was a
Wow.
normal food item. This
Today
shit
is a
was huge.
commodity.
You used to
Yeah.
have to get these giant channel lock pliers. You weren't using hand crackers. You couldn't get it around the goddamn bottom of the claw. We had
Fucking
these
shit.
huge channel locks you'd use, and as a kid, you weren't even strong enough to break it. You'd have to use a friggin' hammer.
Fuck.
You don't see that anymore. Swordfish used to come in different colors. There was like yellow swordfish, pink swordfish, and it was all basically big blue, but you don't see those variations when you buy swordfish anymore. You don't see the subtleties in the species. You get this. And so I just realized that those things that I once had as a kid, we probably just overfished it, wiped it out, and it's just no longer present.
Yeah. And that's how the gene pool also goes now in modern cannabis industry, right?
Yep.
It's so brother with sister with cousin with grandmother again with grandfather again. All the time the same families collide each other.
It's
Yeah.
they're sexy and it makes it easy. And so, but the problem is, I got into this the other day, right? And I don't know if I said it right, but it would piss some people off. But it was about Big Ag doesn't pheno hunt, and everyone started screaming they do. But the thing was, I got to work with the guy that developed GMO corn for Monsanto, right? So I don't know if it gets any fucking higher than that in the food chain. And right,
No.
and so he was, he's brilliant PhD, but like people don't catch it. When you get to a certain level in breeding, there's only so many companies you can actually go work for and make any money. And that's basically, a Bayer, which is now Monsanto, Syngenta, BASF. There's only so many companies where you're skilled. Just like when you're a brilliant neurosurgeon, you're not working at the local fucking emergency room.
No.
You can't. You can't pay back your doctor debt, right? You've got to go where the money is, right? So you go 400, 500 grand into school debt. You got to go make the cash, and you also need to be able to use the tools, or otherwise you're not really satisfying your desires. So I get lucky in that in life I get to bump into these guys, and they were astounded that cannabis was pheno hunting and that there was no inbred populations to pull from. And he was like, Kev, he goes, we go to the corn bank and we basically go grab inbred lines that we work with. He goes, that's what took so long in cannabis, was for science teams to inbreed the populations that they were going to use for their hybridizations. And I was trying to tell somebody, because people were saying, science guys can't do shit. And I'm like, all right, so you're still riding a fucking horse. Right? So I got you. Still, I got you. You sail across the fucking ocean in a rowboat.
Yeah.
If it wasn't for science and whole
You
dynamics,
have no
you
air
wouldn't have big
conditioning,
ships.
no ice.
You know what I'm saying? So, like, I don't worship at the altar of science, but I know damn well what it can do when you give it time and money.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the idea that lines are what they work with. They try to work. So even if it's a fucking tomato, where you have a variation of a tomato, you're not doing it by clone. When I go buy tomatoes, when I buy some of these old antiquity tomatoes, they're from seed, because when I take the seed out of the tomato, we recreate it. My girl holds those seeds and does it. Is it a fucking exact copy of each one? No. There's subtle shifts, but the majority of the traits pretty much breed true. That allows you to have enough genetic variation to hopefully ward off future pathogens. which is the issue with the inbreeding shit, is that when you take a look, it's the problem with the fuels, is that when we got into doing, work in the United States, so much of the Afghani work, because you don't have any humidity in Afghanistan and Pakistan, and I'm talking like so low it blows your mind. You dry up in the winter. I mean, I'm talking like the skin on your lips cracks off. It's so dry. So you're drinking gallons of water when you are not even warm because you're so dry. You can hang herb and it's drying in the room as you're looking at it. It's crazy how bone dry it is. And I really didn't understand how the fuck you could get such agricultural quality with so little water. And I realized, I got you. It's glacial flow. So atmospherically bone dry, but because you have a 27,000 foot cap of historic ice that's constantly moving and flowing down as glacier, that's where the water comes from. They don't worry about botrytis and they don't worry about PM. But when you move those materials into the U.S., all of a sudden you now had these pathogens, and the material that we bred and use inherently had that trait of susceptibility. It spawned, I always tell people, I said, don't tell me any fuel that you're touching didn't get covered with some eagle at some point in your life.
I'll tell you.
The amount of that shit that got used. Well, the thing was, I got lucky that I knew how to read an MSDS sheet, and so
I just wasn't willing to use it.
And my mother wasn't about what I did at all, but my mother was somebody that I could call on the phone and say, hey, Ma, what do I need to be aware of with these products? And she would send me the information, right? And she would just send it from her office and say, here, this is what this is.
Wow.
So it helped me understand that all the stuff that we were using was absolutely cumulative in its response, and that at some point in time you would saturate with this shit. And the ability to be able to get it out of the system. And so, and it caused problems too, because for us at the nursery, we ran a bio nursery. And so we were getting hammered at times trying to understand, how do you really use biological pest control at scale? So I was getting some people talking shit, but what no one can talk shit on was the extraction companies that I worked with. I was the only fucking vendor they could get clones from and make product that could go into a system that was tested. So you have to go through these evolutions of how do you take tools that are effective and replace them with natural systems. And it's what really helped me understand the issues we were going to face with organic ag at scale, because there is no other crop that's run at that density level they want herb run at biologically, right? You just don't have that level of density in a house, and the plant count and the no ability to use tools. So it's just, everyone relied on these things, but those things changed the plants, and they allowed us to use plants in projects that we really shouldn't have used. And it's the same issue with feminization. People are anti-feminization, and I used to be anti-feminization too, because we noticed micro seeds in the lab, right? So when the product came in, the lab that I worked with, brilliant lab scientists were like, Kev, we always notice these microscopic seeds that come in a lot of this feminized work. And so I started to have a disbelief in feminization as a tool, but what I learned was that it's an incredibly powerful tool to isolate and trap traits of interest. It's just that when you do reversals, the plants that reverse the quickest are also the ones most prone to intersex tendencies. So you're trying to chase the money, but you're also weaving in. And then so the idea then is you go through the line and you got to go select out. And I'm just like, that's my whole point with this pheno hunting shit, is that cannabis was a seed line that you ran, and there was enough diversity within it to give you some protection. So the part that's so interesting is they have identified, on the chromosome where this marker is that says this is the gene that controls your PM. But what we know is that you have all these interlinked genes that many genes combined cause an expression. So as we start to go in and start to work with cannabis and start to, CRISPR it a little, which is remove it, shorten it, or you start to identify traits and you only select for those, we don't know the big picture impact of what that does because we've never done it. So it's the beginning of like, what are we doing to the actual plant itself? And because cannabis is so unbelievably complicated as a plant, and almost every other ag crop is basically evaluated by tons per acre, right? Bushels per acre, right? So like when you breed in corn, which someone was like, breeding corn, I'm like, fuck, you feeding the world. I don't think you quite understand the impact of that. Well, like you're feeding countries with the product. The impact is massive. It's only viewed as a success if you're getting more in that field. And that would imply that it had protections installed into it to make it happen. But whatever it is, what matters is you get more. With cannabis, that's not how we evaluate it. It's not about more. It's about, did you enjoy it? And because you have this human evaluation, it's very different. It makes it tough. And so for me, the question is, are we going to be able to use science and humans together to steer true breeding populations that can be used in hybridization, access to gene banks to bring interesting material into projects, and the ability for science to look at stuff in a way to help us that aren't scientists understand how do we use scientific principles in our breeding, but steering the end product to be consumptive quality, not just measure. Because analytics and COAs and all the other shit, it gets you to a target, but we don't know the riddle. I always call them the riddles. They're many things together create the answer.
We don't know what we don't know.
Totally, and I think that's important to say. And I don't think, and I know that there's some people that are absolutely, drowning in weed. Like we talk, Sam. I was on a podcast with Dave Watson the other day, right? Sam Skunk Man, and fuck, guy spent his whole life drowning in weed. I mean, drowning in it. Like, I don't know if anybody went that damn deep. He's like the hash makers I met in Pakistan, where when I'm talking to an old guy and I'm like, when did you do this? He goes, my first memories of being like 3, working with my father in the hash room, beating hash. And he goes, I don't know any other life. And he said, and neither did my father, and neither did my father's father. He goes, we've been here for 1,800 years making hash. And he goes, and the techniques have evolved because we've got different material to work with. The quality of the fabric, basically, they beat on, and the understanding of how to work with it. But it was when he was holding a piece of hash and he was rolling it in his fingers and it was moving through his hand, I just was kind of mystified by it because it was like 2,000 years of hash touching I was seeing. He was probably in his 40s, and looking like he's in his 70s, man. Living in the mountains is rough. But the way the hash moved in his fingers, I just was like, wow, just forever. It's almost like, you're born a Rothschild. And Rothschild wasn't their original name, right? They had that's the name they took. But you have a genius father who has sons that kick ass, and every kid after them was shaped and groomed. By the time you get to right now, how smart are they in money? If all you've done is instill information every generation, and you're only selecting and doing that route, at what point are you really, really talented at something, So I don't see myself in that route. I'm lucky that I got to experience so much, and I have some opinions, and there's some shit I know is fact, but a lot of it is to be just still mystery. And I think that's why I like herbs so much, is that it's what I don't know that's cool. The knowing shit gets dry. You're like, yeah, fuck, I know now. But it's the mystery is the fun part.
It's funny that you say that, because I don't know if we talked about it the last time, but I have strong opinions on certain subjects, right? But it would be as exciting and amazing if I was proven wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't have this ego where, like, I want to be right. I'd rather learn something new. You know, so I think I mentioned it in the last time we spoke about, like, the debate between organic and inorganic in a container, grown indoors. And I just think that if you try to do it in a container, indoors, in 2 months, you're going to have a hard time doing it organic in comparison to using minerals. But if someone were to show me, oh, look how easy it is to do it organic, and you're going to get a higher quality product, I would be so glad that I was wrong. You know, so
And what's about labor too, man? I know you need basically, like we kind of have some ideas that you need at least 15 to 20 gallons of soil as a sink for a plant in order to get enough material to access to work in what we would call like a living indoor system. But when you get into 2 and 3 gallon pots, that shit's tough. And it just requires very frequent supplementation where you're adding more material. And a lot of it just comes down to work. It's the same thing with if you're running a blue mat, is that cheating? Where the plants, the moisture level in the media is telling it when it needs to be wet versus by hand when you feel the plant's needs. And I just
I don't think
that
it's cheating.
we fight over this shit all the time. And what matters is that the method that you're using works for you and it produces good quality cannabis. Because I consume salt pot that is excellent, and then I consume some salt pot that's pretty damn bland, where it looks
Same with
incredible.
organic, though, right?
I
remember back in the day,
it's
people
all organic because it's carbon based, but we're saying that you're using chemical delivery as your nutrient source. As long as we're not using chemistry on the top end of the plant,
I agree.
I'm not so picky where I won't consume anything that's salt based grown. I will. It's just that what I notice is that some things that are salt-based grown just don't have the same quality as things that are organically produced. And organically, we're gonna say is biologically driven, or I call it exudate driven. The plant sugars are driving the fucking process, right? Plants driving the process. I use the word organic with it, and just so that we have a context, because the words get used so interchangeably. But chemically driven, meaning you're using a salt solution to do the uptake. I see some incredible cannabis that comes out of that as well, and I think that some of the mixes give better results than others depending on what cultivar, depending on what person. So you got to be able to say best is a very specific phrase that implies a thing. Not all herb grown outdoor is better than all herb grown indoor. I hear it all the time, and I'm like, it's not true. And I was talking about, the concept of appellations and valuations, and I said if we utilize the same... You want to say hi?
Hi.
Hi.
That's my son Wilder. Want to wave?
Hi.
His
Oh,
name's
you got
Wilder.
orange? Okay.
Hi, Wilder.
All right, you be good. I love you. So it was this idea that the French had this incredible appreciation for the land and all these details, and that's what created the wine industry, was this incredible appreciation for all this shit. The fucking truth of it was, you get into that 1850 zone, there was 3 kinds of wine: red, white, and rosé. And it was the World's Fair that was in Paris that prompted the French to realize that they had the world in their neighborhood. We might as well highlight a region and bring forth appreciation for wine. And how did they do it? They did it off of 2 metrics: the price point, current market price point, and reputation of the brand. And then 70 years later, they define the AOC, which is this appellation of origin. Where'd the product come from? What's the impact of the product? And this is most definitely real. Regions, without question, have impact on products. You can't deny that. And my point of contention on this lecture I gave, though, was that if we follow that convention today, right? We follow the French's convention today, then Jungle Boys and Cookies would be Grand Cru, because their shit sells for the most money in LA, Alien too, right? Most money in Los Angeles, most well-known brands. People lost their minds and they were like, Kev, you've lost your way. You're an outdoor turncoat. And I'm like, I only have an outdoor farm that I produce product from. I'm just telling you that these beliefs that we're holding so firmly today, if we went back, they said, but if we went back, I said, if we went back, they'd have electricity too. So they didn't have the ability to light anything up in 1850, or you wouldn't call operating in a greenhouse gas lamp technology, right? So like using lighting to change the photo period, which is all based off of scotobiology, which is chicken production. So chicken production educates people on agricultural production. What did they use to change the lighting? Blackout cloths and what? Fucking gas lamp, not electricity. Well, if they didn't have the gas lamp, you wouldn't have gas lamp technology, right? You still wouldn't be doing any kind of flower forcing. So they obviously used the technology they had, which was a goddamn candle.
Can you explain this a little bit better to me as far as how, because I don't know anything about chicken breeding or...
Oh, totally. What farmers noticed was that hens laid better under certain light conditions, duration of light, breaking up light patterns. And so they call that scotobiology. And it's a very similar parallel to me as the parallel to BRICS. So BRIX, right? So the idea of measuring sugar as a means of determining when a crop should be harvested was developed for grape. So this individual develops the science to determine when is a grape ripe. When do we harvest? Because remember, we harvest off all this shit. There's no science. It just has to be empirical. It has to be through our eyes only. So they said there must be a way to do this. And so they come up with an idea. Say, hey, we can measure sugars. They run a strip through a refractometer. You see the level. And they say, okay, this sugar level is higher than it was a week ago. We have a greater sugar in the product. This sugar should give us a better end product because that sugar is going to convert into alcohol once you apply the fermentation process. Well, the next question was, can we apply it to all foods? And all of a sudden, BRICS-based agriculture is born. But it's based off of first, when do you pick a grape? And then it became, how do we drive nutrient density into all these crops? So scotobiology is the first step in light manipulation with plants because it's farmers being aware that if we manipulate lighting, we can impact chicken production. Well, someone said, what else does it do? And do I know who did that? No, I don't need to. I just need to know where it came from, where the idea was it born, and then how did it evolve? And so then it evolves into glass house. And they used to call them greenhouses, were called glass houses. They also called conservatories. And that's all London, Eastern Europe. People with money had conservatories, which let them grow tropical plants in cold environments because it was a flex. The wealthy always flex. And the flex at that time was these beautiful maze-like gardens and conservatories. And it even continued in the U.S. all the way up into the 70s with when Silicon Valley wealth started to explode in the 70s, early 80s, all the wealthy went big on landscaping and then realized that the next step was winery acquisition. And so that's when you started to see California wine being touched by all the mega wealthy as wine owners, wine investors, because it allowed them to flex on something that allowed them to lose money on the investment, but reduce capital gains on their income. So all these things that we see have all these impacts that shape and change. So glasshouse technology, they weren't growing that shit till they figured out how to fucking trap heat and UV inside a structure. You weren't getting flowering to occur or not getting it to occur without that gas lamp technology. So if we call, the original greenhouses glass houses and we call it gas lamp, that means they were using technology, they were using science. So what we do is we hold these things in our mind as the purity of what they did. But when the French created the system, this was the foundation. And so me and a bunch of these cats that are wine based got into this argument, and then a bunch of people that know me from cultivation got into it, saying, "Oh my God, you're destroying the world of organic outdoor." And I'm like, I'm not. I'm simply stating that when they created these systems, it was using the information they had at that time. And so we have to look at it in that same situation today, where,
Kevin, have
yeah,
you ever heard about Rudolf Steiner? He was an
yes,
Austrian architect and also very esoteric at that time. He was born in 1861
mm-hmm,
and died in 1925. But he actually is a marker in European times. He lived in Switzerland most of his time, I think, and he has a center of esoterics. You know, and he is like somebody that this hippie generation that was then, you know, like in the 60s or 70s here in Europe, in Eastern Europe also, was looking up to, like building your own house. You looked for architectural, like Rudolf Steiner or Friedrich Hundertwasser, you know, the other Austrian. They have no sharp edges, you know. Everything is from nature. Everything is like with waves, and it's like everything. Like even in USA, I think guys did few years ago these earth ships in New
oh,
Mexico in the
totally,
desert.
totally,
Yeah, did
yep,
that kind of philosophy to involve, to go into the nature, to you know, that is us actually. That kind of people. We are always interested. We will be working until we die. You know,
oh yeah.
like we,
There's no end of it.
there is
It's
no there is no pension. You know, it's like
it.
there is no. I mean, pension in the sense that you would stop working on something, you know, because you seem to me like a guy that will be like written in history books, you know, like
As a
something you do
lunatic.
now. Yeah, yeah, man. Yeah, you are infected. You are infected with the virus, you know, of researching cannabis until you die, you know.
Yeah, there's no end. It's really, it's funny, but like when I started growing in the '70s, it was outdoor in my grandmother's garden,
Yeah.
and then in the '80s, I get into doing indoor, and then in the mid 2000s, when we're allowed to really go back outside because there was some loopholes in the law, you return to your outdoor cultivation. And as I started to get older, I started to realize that with legalization, if I had the ability to spend the rest of my life legally cultivating, I wanted to do it outside in a biological system. And it was just purely because there was so much mystery that remained, that it let me be in wonder. Where when I'm in technological systems, I'm amazed at the complexity of the technology, but there's a disconnect that's different. And I'd spent so many years, decades, grinding out indoor operations, that I wanted to finish my career under the sun. And it's almost like a complete reversal of no tech. And I call it like, natural tech, where you're using natural systems and you're forced to bend to that constraint. And you may only get, a true vintage year, every, just like wine, 20, 2 out of 10, 4 out of 10 tops. So out of 10-year period, only 2 to 4 of those are going to be what we consider a vintage year, where phenomenal conditions. But at that moment in time, the product's unbelievable. And like coincidentally, this was one of those years. This was one of those vintage years where this is probably one of the best years of cultivation we had in the triangle, probably the last decade minimum. And to be able to be part of it was incredible. To be able to watch this climate just bring out these qualities, I dig. But does that mean that I think it's the only way? No. And just because I like it and I think that it has a low impact on the environment, does that mean that everyone has to follow what I do? No. That's the whole point of me being buck wild my whole life and running around, was I don't want to get told what the fuck to do. I don't want to get told the fuck what to do kind of guy. So I don't usually try to tell other people what to do. It's just what we try to do is put information on the table so people can take from it, from the open plate, as they choose. And if they want to refute it, they refute it. If they want to use it, they can use it. But it allows us to be able to work, I think, more cohesively. And I think that that's what I really wanted out of the experience of like public cannabis, was being able to look at 1,000 different things and get 1,000 different viewpoints. And we're all able to kind of come together on some generalizations we all agree on. And then there's some shit that nobody agrees on. And that's what lets us stay hungry until we find out.
I think I said this before, but we don't want to be influencers. We want to be people that inspire.
Yeah, totally.
Right? You know, like, I'll tell you how I do it, and if you're inspired by it, then that's awesome. One thing I wanted to ask you is, do you know a guy, he's a teacher here in Sonoma County, Bob Kennard?
I don't know Bob.
I'll send you a video to watch from him, but I like to talk about him because he was my organic gardening teacher at the Sonoma County, at the Santa Rosa JC, and it was so inspiring. What he told us was that we had to grow 2 plants for the earth for every plant that we grow for ourselves, so that we're never depleting it. And
Holy, no, I love it.
when you went to his farm,
Mm-hmm.
at first sight, all you saw was weeds, right? It was just like weeds everywhere. And then as you walk through the field of weeds, you see the plants that are growing, you know, basically almost covered in weeds. And the food that we ate there it was like from the Garden of Eden. It was incredible. And while I loved growing organic, he was the one that made me realize can't really do this in a short period of time in a pot.
No, it's
like
it's the Synorganic version indoor, yeah.
Yeah. And so, you know, people think when I talk about how I don't think you can grow organic in a pot in a couple of months, they think that I'm a hater of organics, but no, I just feel like it's a long-term thing. Like, he bought a piece of land that was in really bad shape, and he didn't go and dump truckloads of compost to grow in there. You know, because
he built it.
That's right, he built it. You know, using the biology and by using plants to feed the soil. And like I said, I just wanted to ask you if you knew about him because he's really inspiring, and I'm gonna just send you a link on some YouTube videos from him because I think you'd enjoy them.
I would, because that's what got me really fascinated with simplicity was the one straw revolution. And the idea that this Japanese gentleman changed the entire country's approach to agriculture through the simple fact of putting straw on the ground and then having chickens shit on it, or ducks. And so you only, you know, and he knew you only need to have, you know, like 10 ducks for every quarter acre. And so over the course of, you know, 20, 30 years, he ends up adding, you know, 2 inches of topsoil, and he's just like that. And it was this forever view, and it helped. And when I got lucky that I got to do, I spent a lot of time with the regenerative groups, and it was this same thing. It was that it's a forever process. It's not a race. It isn't like you build this thing and it's done and it just works. It's forever. And it allows you to understand that if you just work towards your goal, you'll get to it at some point. And it's the process of working towards the goal, like everything. It's like whatever we do, the work is what really defines the outcome. I mean, you win a lotto ticket, it's easy. You scratch a ticket. But the odds of that are like, you know, 1 in 400 million. So very limited chance of success. But if we work towards a goal and you chip away, you'll get closer to it. And even if you don't get the exact goal, the process alerted you to many pathways to where you want to go, and you end up having alternative routes that work. And I just think that we as a culture have become so instantaneous in what we demand, we don't ever want to put the time in. And we don't understand that it's the actual time that's the gift. It's not the end product as much as you think. It's the work. The process changes you. It sands off your rough edges. It's kind of like being out in the desert. The wind and the sand just slowly start to round off all the lines. and that worn, smooth look is comfortable to the eye. There's a feel, and I just think that we've become so instantaneous that we don't really understand that. You're like, to me, you never get to the end, because when you get to where your goal was, it allows you to be able to see other goals from that vantage point that you couldn't see prior, because you didn't have the skills or the experience or the wisdom to understand. But once you spend 5 years trying to figure something out and you get to a point, you're like, okay, this is how much I know, this is how much I don't know. And you're able to kind of figure, do you want to continue down that road, or you want to start a new path? And to me, that is the world of agriculture and plants. And there's just mysteries we don't understand because maybe we're not meant to. I don't think I want to know every detail. I don't. The idea of engineering humans sounds great because you'll get rid of all these diseases and you'll get rid of all these issues. And you also take away the very thing that makes human life valuable, is that it's limited. If you live forever, would you appreciate things the same way? I mean, you don't. And so and as you grow older, you realize it, because I have a lot of friends of mine that are dead. You make sure that you are a little bit more thoughtful in the interactions, and you make sure that you enjoy these little moments a little bit more profound, because they could end. And I think that when you start to have no risk, what's the reward worth? And that's an opinion. So I mean, I'm not saying everybody's got to live that life, but the struggle.
It's a philosophy.
The struggle
is a philosophy. It's not an opinion. It's a philosophy. And it reminds me of the conversation that we had before we ever recorded together. And I laugh about this now, and I actually brag about it. Is that we're talking about master gardeners. You said you're a master gardener. And so what I did was, now in my bio, I write Gaby Bronstein or Gaby Staten Island, open quotes, master gardener, close quotes, by Kevin Jodrey.
Totally.
Because Kevin Jodrey called me a master gardener. It was like one of the... I blushed.
But it's genuine.
But what I wanted to say is I don't want to master anything. This is what I said to you, and I'd like you to repeat what your response was. I thought the master gardener term was kind of like, well, this means I've got nothing left to learn. I know everything, and I'm not going to learn from you because I'm your master. And you gave me a different definition of it. And not only did it make me feel good that you said I'm a master, but it also made me think about things differently, just like you did when we had the conversation about, what is craft cannabis. Because honestly, after talking to you, I think I was wrong. Which, like I said, I like being wrong. But like what I thought about craft cannabis today is different than what I did after our conversation.
Totally. What people do is they put titles on themselves because it makes them feel good, and that's okay. We all need some self-affirmation. But when you're talking about a craft, something done by hand, then we can say that there's craftspeople, and almost all crafts have an evolution of development. We start out as apprentice. You're unskilled, and you need to be supervised. As you develop that ability, you become a journeyman. You're somebody that can work independently, but you're not qualified to run a project. You don't have big picture perspective. When you become a master at a craft, you have an ability to run a project and educate journeymen who then supervise apprentices. So my family was filled with master welders, master carpenters, master plumbers, master electricians. When I was in the military, I worked for a master diver. Does that mean that master diver, and the first master diver I worked for was a guy named Payne, Bosun Mate Master Chief Payne. What an appropriate name. This guy was hard as fuck. But brilliant. But at no moment in time do any of these people at the master level ever think that there's not more for them to learn. But what they know is that they're probably the most qualified in the room at that moment, and that their job is to run the project. And so when you're a master cultivator, you're able to do that. I'm a master gardener. And I said that to somebody, and someone said, and what makes you think so? I said, University of California, Berkeley. So it's really simple. I fucking took a program and I passed the test, and it allows me now to do one very specific thing. It lets me communicate agricultural principles based off of the database of UC Berkeley. So that way what we have consistent information. But do I think that that's the end all be all of all things? No, it's just that they know that we can say this because there's proof. But
that's why footnotes, there are footnotes, you know, when you read literature.
Yes.
There is footnotes, and footnotes means that you go and search for, because this information that somebody writes down has to be valid, you know, it has to come from somewhere.
Yes,
That is what footnotes,
unless it's your hypothesis.
you know, but, you know, people today don't even know what footnotes are and why they are standing for. You know, if sometimes one book can be, I mean, for example, here is a book of bamboo. It's called The Book of Bamboo by David Farrelly. You know, it's an American guy, and it's a encyclopedia where you have after each chapter you have a footnote. You have like the secondary literature where you can search for more books, and this book is actually the gateway to like 500 books.
Oh,
you know?
totally.
Yeah, which is really specific, really specific, you know.
Because they're saying that this does this based off of the work that this person did prior. And it's a respect for others' work. And you're not trying to say you invented it. You're just saying, hey, I endorse it, I use it, I'm letting you be aware of it, but this is the person who came up with the idea. And so... well, otherwise it becomes this, you know, everyone's like, you know, you're mastery. It's just like people use the word improperly, but if you're in trades, the master plumber who's running the project doesn't say, I'm not a master plumber, I'm just a work. Like, it's a fucking title. It's kind of like saying, you know, when you're the CEO of the company, or you're the COO or the CFO or the CTO or whatever the fuck C-suite you are, you just say it. It's your title. It's just what it is. Does that mean that you're the only one on earth? No. Does it mean you're the best one on earth? No. It could be. You know, if you're talking about, you know, somebody running one of these venture capital firms and they're carrying $1 trillion in value, I would say that's probably a pretty intelligent CEO. But in general, it just states a fact. And in cannabis, to me, if you're a master at it, you're so I wouldn't consider myself a master indoor grower, because I no longer, like, I study and I research and I work, but that's not where I put my time. I shift it over to how do plants work with operations, how do plants work with people. And it lets me work on what I like, which is biologically driven sun grown. That's where I want to spend my time as a cultivator. But I research indoor and outdoor and mixed light operations continuously so I can understand impact on cultivar selection and on cultivar performance. So I kind of figured out where I really enjoy what I do. So I have to understand how your operation works. But I know rivers of people that are far smarter than I am in all these different areas that I'm involved in. I just try to be intelligent in integrating all these things simultaneously. That's kind of like my skill set, is that I can pull out of a giant bag and put it together into a ball. But the ability for me to say, hey, I know someone better in every room is critical. Because then what it does, it always makes sure that you're crystal clear about your level and rank. And that isn't something that most people want to do, because you have to be comfortable with yourself to do it. And what we have is, I think, a society of people that unfortunately have been beat down because you're living in the media. So if you're not rocking really nice shit, you don't have all these things, all this stuff, you're not somebody. And so you need validation. I think that's like with cannabis, that was like the big issue, where when the world of legality was coming in, everyone in cannabis said, well, they don't have our skills. Well, yeah, they fucking do. And, well, they don't have our genes. Yeah, they do.
They do.
So what is it that you have? What do you have if everyone has all your secret shit? you don't have anything except pissed off and anger and rage. And what needs to happen is you need to say, I got you. I need to go and tighten up my shit and continue my educational process. But who wants to do that when you're making lawyer money out of your closet, right? So like, it's tough when you incentivize things financially. It makes you think you're smart because we measure everything in money. Money's the only thing that can be anything, and everything is measured against. Like, I tried to figure this out a long time ago, but cash has a really unique position in the world because everything we do is measured by that pretty much, and it can become anything. So money is this flexible bill of exchange that doesn't rely on coincidence of wants. And so we use that as this thing. So when you're making a lot of money, you don't think you're making any mistakes. You're like, look how much I'm making, look how well I'm doing. You don't really understand that it sometimes, and a lot of times, it's just straight luck. So even with investment, you get into something early, you blow up, you're brilliant, do that shit again, and you're going to find out that you're not necessarily so good at that as what you thought, but you got lucky. And that's herb to me. So many of us got lucky, and I got lucky in that I realized in my late 30s that we were going to get the living shit kicked out of us when this went legal. I had no question. I had no question because I was researching commercial ag. I went to school for it, and then I go into, like floriculture, development of potted plants, flowers, and I start to really look at those operations because I got access to them, and I'm like, oh, we're going to get murdered. They're going to kick the shit out of us because their level of efficiency is crazy, and the public in America, as much as people don't want to admit it, we're mids country. We would rather have smorgasbord all you can eat than
$9.99.
Yeah, cheap. That's America, man. We rely on it, right? We've been taught to be bulk consumers since birth. For generations now, we've been shaped to purchase indiscriminately. Buy, buy, buy. So I just said, oh, we're going to get murdered. And so I've been like, whoa. And it forced me to start to really relook at what I did and relook at my approach and try to understand where's my pathway forward when I know I'm not going to get to compete with infrastructure. You can't compete with people that can raise $200 million. And just because you raise $200 million doesn't mean you're going to exist either. But while that money is in play, everyone around you that's competing against you is getting bloodied because they're able to use the money as the beating tool. And then if they succeed, they continue. If they fail, they go away. But if you're trying to compete with somebody that's operating at below margin and they're dumping, and you can't. And the market doesn't give a shit. The market's like, what, $6 weed? Even better. Nobody wants this, people talk about, I don't want the primo shit. And I'm like, no, America's pretty much low-end shit, or we wouldn't have a proliferation of fast food the way we do. We love bulk cheap shit.
Do you think the what is happening now in Europe, in Germany, for example, that it will change a little bit the game also in USA? Because like you are not federal yet, right? You have certain states have legalized, but now, for example, Germany started in Europe like a first move, in the direction of legalization. So many countries will follow. Actually, I think Kevin,
they do.
Yeah,
I work in Germany. I work. I don't say I work in Germany, but I work in other countries that provide to Germany. Mm-hmm. And so we still have our position. And at some point in time, when the United States goes federally legal, when the U.S. turns on its machine, it's hard to compete against. I mean, we're not China, because China can basically outcompete anybody, but a lot of it is because in China, the Chinese are brilliant historically for, millennia. But they also have very low restrictions on OSHA, right? Job safety and environmental. EPA and OSHA is a little off. So it allows them to be able to have, a competitive advantage. But when you get into cannabis that's going to be going through the level of scrutiny that they're looking at, and right now they're talking like category 4, more and more stringency on the stuff. the United States has an ability to absolutely turn on a factory. But we're so caught up in our own bullshit, and we made so much money for the government off the drug war that they don't ever want to get rid of it. Like, we can't get rid of it. We're addicted to that drug war money. Or you wouldn't see, if you kind of look at it, like you look at it historically in the U.S., right? Methamphetamines in the 70s, legal. You get them prescribed to you. When I was a kid, right, when I was like 12, 13, you go to a party, there would be all this methamphetamine in pill form at the party. So you'd have a couple beers and grab some of these things. You'd be wired out of your mind, right? That shit was coming out of your grandmother's medicine cabinet. This shit wasn't on the street. Well, they get rid of the prescriptions. They do the analogs. It goes into like diet pills. And then it just begins the whole meth revolution. You go into opiates, right? We schedule all these synthetic opiates. We schedule them as Schedule 3, which means they're easily accessed. We saturate the country to the limit beyond comprehension. Then we restrict. Same with meth. We saturate, restrict, create an illegal industry. Now we have a drug war we can fucking wage since the 70s against meth. It's been the last so many years against on opiates, but you take a look and the fentanyl crisis is across the country because people can't access pharmaceutical oxy like they once did. So the drug war is we have drugs that we create, we saturate, we remove, we penalize. And it's this system, if you look at it, I can point to a whole variety of different products that's been done with. That we're addicted to that duality of money. We want to make the money on people using the cash to influence the system, to add that money into the world. And then we want to punish the shit out of them so that we can keep the prison system moving. You know, I mean, like, I don't think people catch the American system where, I didn't catch it either, but I got a dude I was in the military with, and he went on and got into prison guard. His family got him into the prison guard world, and it was a good world for me. Did well financially and had a good life. So he and I maintain our relationship. But he was saying, I run a cabinet shop, and I'm like, what, for rehab? He goes, no, we sell the products. And I said, how much you make? He goes, my division in this prison does $180 million a year. And I said, let me get this straight. Out of the fucking prison in Pennsylvania, one division of this little prison is doing $180 million in fucking woodwork sales? I said, how the fuck is that possible? And he goes, we create the GSA products. We create the products for the federal government. He goes, it's all contract, Kev. He goes, we make the metal desks or the wood desk that they put in all the offices. He said, so the desk is like $25,000, $30,000 desk. He goes, it's costing us fucking $200 to make it. And I said, where's all this money going? He goes, into the investors that built the privatized prison industry. And I started laughing because it made me realize just how fucking undereducated I am about this reality that the American system of drug enforcement is really feeding prison systems that create products that get sold to the federal government. And the money chain is so thick and deep, they'll never get rid of this shit. So the U.S., we just kicked the farm bill down the road another year, right, on the THCA hemp issue. And I don't really care one way or another how it goes because it's above my control. But the idea of how they manipulate and move this, it depends on how much money they're making and who benefits. And the ability to maintain that duality. It's the same with California. When I talked to I had the governor of the fucking state in my office. Like, so I don't know any of the dope growers that had like every major politician in their state come and have lunch with them in their office. And I asked him, I said, why do we have all these, cannabis deserts in California? Like, why are there so many places that we're not going to be able to have cannabis? And he said, it's a capitulation to law enforcement. And I said, I don't understand. And he said, law enforcement won't approve legality of cannabis in California. They won't give us a go-ahead on it. They'll fight me politically. And that fight politically will keep me from being reelected. So he goes, so they use their lobby to control what takes place because the money that you make from drug interdiction isn't part of your like discretionary budget. So they don't get to keep all the money. They have to cut up the pie But the fact is, they're able to have a budget that they use, and then they're able to go and steal as much money as they can get their hands on that they get to use to do all their other shit. And he said they're fundamentally addicted to the money. And so if California...
So which governor said this?
Gavin Newsom. So if...
That's something that I'd like to see printed right there, right? I mean, like, it's like he's admitting...
Oh, fuck, you can't say that shit out loud, though. I mean, I'm telling you because we had the conversation in the office.
He said it out loud, or it was privately to you?
Well, he said it out of his mouth to my ear, but we were in my office.
Oh.
So he's not going to get on a stage and say that shit. Because I asked him, I said, why do you guys got to, what's the power of law enforcement in terms of political? And he goes, they have the most powerful lobby there is. He said, the number of times an election has been won by somebody who is not in favor of the political of the police group is almost negligible. There's almost none. So it's this risk where you have to support law enforcement so heavily, or what they do is they give you a vote of no confidence, and it states to the public, hey, we have no faith in this person keeping you safe. And they've done such an effective job in creating that illusion that it's effective. And so that's the problem with the U.S. is that we're making so much money off the drug war shit that there's no need. It's the same argument that I got to meet one of the lead scientists from Syngenta. We met at an event, and he actually had followed me online, right? So he approached me and said, hey, I follow your shit. And he said, and I just wanted to talk to you about weed. So we're talking about weed, and I'm asking him, I'm like, are you guys in weed? And he goes, no. He goes, and I said, how come? He goes, we're global food. He said, we feed the earth. He goes, we don't give a fuck about weed money. He goes, when we get into weed, you will know it. He goes, because we have a couple $1 million a day in disposable money we can spend just on R&D. He said, so when we enter weed, there is no question you will know Syngenta's in the room because you're not going to fuck with us. And I was like, whoa. But there was no need. And I said, so just not the money? And he goes, no, it's also the risk. He goes, if we build infrastructure in America, in a country that's federally illegal, he goes, we could have nationalization occur, and they could take our product. And a good example of that is, years and years ago, remember Franco that used to work with the greenhouse?
Yeah.
Yes.
Franco, he was a sweetheart of a guy. Franco,
strain hunter.
Yeah, he was a lovely guy too. He was a former military, got into hospitality management, and then he becomes Aaron's partner, and they do all that work. But he comes into Humboldt County in like 2007, maybe 2008, to see if we wanted to contract to make seeds for the greenhouse. And it was hysterical because he comes to me and he's like, we want to pay you $100,000 to make seed. And we're laughing because at that time, you're making that shit a month. And you're like, you gotta be
and he was going to make millions on it.
You gotta be kidding me, right? Yeah, and he's like,
millions.
no, you don't understand. I'm talking 100,000. And I said, look, you got to go to some other country and go fuck those people over because that doesn't work for us. I said, why don't you go to Africa and pull that shit there? And he said, we did, but they nationalized our whole operation and took it from us. Mm-hmm. So it's this risk of working in countries that they'll take your stuff. And so me and Franco become friends, and we maintained a good friendship because he was a good guy. But I'll never forget that $100,000 because it was like fucking Dr. Evil. $1 million. And they laughed, $1 million. But it was the same deal in that you don't really understand what's at stake and how many people are making money off of this. And so we see it as it would be good for us. Well, we're not really, if any American believes they have any value as a citizen, you're fucking deluding yourself. You're just a cog and a gear and a big machine. And so I think that at some point when the U.S. gets involved, you'll see some changes globally because that's what we do is global fucking business. And we'd be able to utilize our tariffs. We'd be able to utilize blockages. We will manipulate. But until that happens, we're siloed. California's siloed. We can't sell to Oregon. Oregon can't sell to us. And the hemp is what got around it. The hemp's what's letting everything move. But if you were to build a business today, how much money would you risk if you know that the farm bill is going to be revisited in a year? And if the farm bill is going to get revisited in a year, does that mean that you have any longevity after that? So I just don't worry about it as much. What I look at is I look at countries that can produce product and sell. So that would be, you know, in my case, Canada, South Africa. Those countries then I can work with to get product moved into Israel, Australia, Germany, and it's all legal. It just lets me come in and help them understand how we would adjust the supply chain and how do we find products that work in these markets and how do we optimize the production of those products. And if we can do all of that, then I'm doing what I need to be doing so I can learn how to function when I get to that point where the U.S. can. Because my whole game with my farm was I figured at some point we'd be able to sell our product in other countries. And if I wasn't trying to produce 10 million pounds of flour, I'm only trying to produce, 1,000 pounds, half a ton, I shouldn't have such a brutal time getting rid of it globally. And it would allow the farm to have a good resonance and let the farm do what I wanted it to do, which was produce good herb because the farm's impact is positive.
Is this farm still Port Royal?
Yeah, because that's like the brand name. It has another name in terms of how the county, the state sees it. But Port Royal.
That is the place, yeah.
Yeah, it's a stunning. I'm on the lip of a caldera of a dormant volcano. So like the whole fucking caldera falls off behind me thousands of feet, and I'm above the fog, and I get true south exposure, and I have incredible water coming out of that mountain. So like I'm the watershed for Butte Creek. So I got some really interesting shit going on, and I just spent the last 8 years brawling it out with the county over who owns the water. So California is obsessed with owning your water. So it took me 8 years to win this fight. But then they said, hey, in 2045, we're going to come back at you again and see if you still own the water. Because that's what they want is control. But that mountain just always produced really good herb. And I have an emotional connection to it. And that's kind of how I wanted to finish my career, was just running that farm up on the edge of that hill. And
well, don't give up yet, partner.
Oh, I'm not.
Don't end your career yet. I'm not. We still need your contribution.
No, I'm done. This is. I want to spend my life doing what I do.
That's beautiful.
I'm not, because someone said, when do you retire? And I said, what do you do when you retire?
When you die.
You get old and die. And I'm like, no, I want to continue with my life. So it just comes down to what your desires are, and also to understand your reality. What is the reality of your existence? And you kind of got to be comfortable with it. And so the U.S. is the U.S. But if you're able to, work in any other country, then you can start to practice. You can start to get the experience you need to be able to understand what's needed, what is these more highly regulated production methodologies and distribution methodologies that are required, and what works in these markets and what doesn't, and how do you optimize supply chain. And so, I'm having a great time learning, and it's been really effective. Like, it's worked for every company. The companies that I did the work for in Canada succeeded. The companies I did the work for in South Africa succeeded. So it just lets you practice and play and learn. And that way I don't sit here wondering like what's going on in California. Because our whole cannabis system basically collapsed, which is mind-bending that Michigan is making more tax revenue than California. Right? Like it's people like, I'm talking, no, I don't think you understand. Nothing against Michigan. Michigan's a beautiful place and they grow some really good weed. But when we're talking about economy, you're talking about California, the 5th largest economy on earth. LA County by itself, that 6 million people cluster, is like top 7, top 8 in the world. Where if you just broke LA free from the rest of the United States, it would be in the top 10 in terms of global performance financially. That shit's California. And we're over here down in like the 187, 200 million tax zone when it should be in the billions. And it's just a total mismanagement of a system, and
It's just the nature of where we're at today. And I just think that I just quit complaining about the lack of fairness. And I just said, fuck it, man. I love growing. I love what I do. I'm just going to work with it. And that way I can at least enjoy what we have, which is the ability to do what we're doing right now. We're on fucking live. We're talking about dope growing. Like, it blows my mind. Because you remember when you first started out, like, I never wore a weed shirt. I had no weed shit. Like, I changed clothes and cars and spots all the time. So I never looked like anybody that would, arouse suspicion. You were living undercover so much, you didn't have a normal life.
It's so funny.
You're only friends you hung out, because if you hung out with regular people and they found out what you did, a lot of them would get so fucking mad. And I realized it wasn't because they were anti-drugs, it was because you exemplified freedom. And the idea that me, a regular person, could have a life better than you, where, like, I don't have to go put up with, I call it patty cake. I don't got to go play patty cake at work every day. I just got to do it myself. That's not bad. And for most people, they didn't really get that. They got to go to work, put up with the boss's shit, work with crazy-ass coworkers, get paid minimal, suck up 40, 50 hours minimum of your life a week. You only have a weekend off. You can't afford to go anywhere. You're not going on vacation. And I'm over there flying to Hawaii during the middle of the week just so I can get out of the area. And you're like, we had a pretty good life. And it made people upset that, and to me it was they were upset because I was just a regular guy. So, like, you fucker. It was like they were mad, and it's the difference between envy and jealousy. You know what I'm saying? Jealousy is, boy, that's a beautiful jacket. I wish I had one. And envy is like, how come that prick has that jacket? One is you want the thing, and the other is you're mad at the person who has the thing. And what we had was really envy over our lifestyle because we didn't have to do that. We had the ability to take a Tuesday off and go to the park with your kid. When I wanted to go to Europe and travel around Europe and do stuff, I took my kid with me. When my son got the opportunity to go and got invited to Russia to train with the national team, I could afford to fucking fly him. When my brother got opportunities to compete globally, I could afford to fly him. And we had privileges that regular people didn't, and they were angry because they did everything they were told, and they followed the rules. They did all the right shit, and it wasn't real. It's the same with medical cannabis. People that are dying to this day still won't use cannabis to help with the issue because of the stigma that's been put on it. So it's just what it is. But I can't change the world, but I can try to be decent to people in person.
Again, you want to be an inspirer.
Yeah, no, I'm not an influencer. What the fuck is that? If I could influence anybody, it'd hopefully be influence your children to be nice to other people. Like if when I see my kids being kind to other people, and when I get the report card and I see the good grade of nice to other children, polite and respectful to other people, I know I did well. But all the other shit really is just you. If you're bright, you're fucking bright, right? I'm somebody that did well academically, or I do well in those situations because my fucking brain works well that way. So that's a gift, right? For me, I got to struggle with other things. Those are the things that I'm really proud of, is the shit that I don't do that well, but I had to work so goddamn hard to get good at. Like, and you're laughing because you're like, to no one else is at anything high level, but to you, you basically started out on your hands and knees, and now you can run. And no, you're not the fastest runner in the world, and you're not trying to say you are, but to you, you know damn well you used to crawl on your hands and knees. And I think that it's those type of internal victories that give us satisfaction. And when you're fighting this struggle on your own and you're doing things, you're very different to other people. You don't attack them. So, like, for me, when I look at, like, online trolls and shit, I laugh, because if you're spending your time trolling, I'm like, oh, you're a miserable motherfucker in real life. And if I can see thousands of you're prolific, I'm just like, you're spending your whole life online talking shit, which means you're not doing anything in your life. And so it's a really good indicator of the quality of your life. And I just think that unfortunately many they haven't found yet a place where they're happy, because once you're happy, you really don't give a fuck about other people's lives. You don't need to get in their shit and fuck
Yeah, for sure.
And I love trolls. Some of the fun, and I like it when they troll me. Sometimes I even help them because I'm like, you're not trolling hard enough. Let me give you some more info.
Yeah.
You know, for real, you gotta fucking laugh, because I'm just like, I ain't worried about you. And this shit doesn't matter to me. If the internet fucking blew apart today, I'd still be me. I'd still be here.
You'd still have your plants.
I'm still doing what I'm doing. I'm working. And if the electricity went out, then I'm cracking seed, and I'm doing it only in the summer. It'll work. It's no matter what, it'll work. And it's just really bending to that reality.
It's such a beautiful attitude you have, man. Yeah. You know,
I like that. If the power went out, we'd still be cracking seeds in the summer.
Period.
Yeah.
No matter what I'm doing, I don't give a fuck. It's gonna happen. But I don't get so caught up in it, and I just know that if I spend my time enraged, I can't turn that off and be with my kids and my gal and my animals and my friends and be positive, right? And positive just means you're not bringing negative shit with you. I don't have to do a thing, say a thing, be a thing. I just be.
You enjoy the small things, the small moments, the real moments. That's what life is all about. Actually,
100%.
Yeah,
It's the nuance. That's what we talked earlier about. You know, this forever life, or the thing was forever. It just, even with cannabis, it made me realize, just be grateful you experienced it when it was at its peak. And be aware that the things you see today are gorgeous also, and that you're seeing them at their peak. And that when they change over time, it's not that our memory's faulty, it's just that there's change. It's like going back to your neighborhood where, you know, you lived in a place that was bad. You come back and now it's good. It's been clean, it's been gentrified. You go to places that were good, and then they've become bad in the way where they've been gentrified, right? So like, the cleansing of gentrification helps bad areas, but it also removes all the fucking flavor. So it's just enjoy it while you're in the room.
There is one thing I wanted to say. It's like, you know, Rashomon, you know, the perspective, you know. We see, everybody sees the same thing, but Rashomon, you have your own. For example, I live in Europe, right? We have these grapes here because I live in a wine producing area. I told about it in the last podcast, a few podcasts ago. It is called the Isabella, the grape, and it's very sweet, you know. It's big blue grapes or big white grapes, and they have a really certain aroma. And we have a cut which is like the Vapa cut from Paradise Seeds, and it has this aroma, you know, like the grape, the Isabella grape. And last time I listened to the podcast with Not So Dog and Crybaby, and Crybaby told, like, in one moment, you know, the Europeans, they don't know how skunk smells because they don't have, you know, we have skunks here, but we don't have your skunks.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? In USA, you have those skunks that you call skunk, and we don't have them. So I actually realized that I never smelled skunk like you would say it's skunk, you know. But
Totally.
I don't know that what this smell is skunk for you. Something else is skunk for me, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's a different, you know. It's because, for example, in my area, everybody that smelled in the 90s that started the weed, indoor weed started to be present in the market. Everybody that smelled indoor weed said it's skunk. It doesn't matter if it's haze or if if not haze, or it does not matter with the type of genetic, but everybody says indoor weed is skunk, you know. That is still today the slang word skunk, you know, or like the word amnesia for the haze in Amsterdam, where everybody forget the wallets and they don't know where the hotel is, and you know, that's why it's amnesia. Actually, it's haze. It's super silver haze.
Interesting. That's where that word came from. It's kind of like right now, gas to us implies petroleum, right? It implies this petroleum-like aroma. But to kids today, gas just means heat. So gas can be anything. Where we say it's gas, someone goes, yeah, this is gas. And you're like, that's not gas. And they're like, yeah, no, it's gas. because they're using it. It's connotation, denotation. It's what the word means and what we believe it means. And a lot of these arguments are that, because at the end of the day, everybody gets triggered. And the internet, it's funny, but the internet creates a situation where people can get triggered quick and then instantly call you a name. They call you a name right away. You're a fucking idiot. And I was laughing. I'm like, this is so interesting. I said, I wonder what you're like in real life. You know what I mean? Because
Oh my God,
like damn. Yeah,
I think we
like,
can guess what he's like in real life.
It's interesting, but it doesn't allow there to be real conversation. And for me, the problem with that is that there's so many people that lurk, that they're online, but they lurk. They never get involved in the discussion because they don't want. It's not that they don't know what they're doing either. They're probably the smartest people in the room. They just don't want to get caught up in the dispute. They don't want to get engaged in more drama. And for me, I do my best to not get engaged in drama, where I just don't. Like, we can go at me all day long, but
ignoring.
Yeah, but when you happen to attack me personally on shit, especially if you don't know me, right? You don't know me, but you're attacking me. I'm just like, you're just looking. And the best thing that anybody can do is basically ignore that person, because it destroys them, because all they want is attention. Because if they post on their own platform, nobody looks at them. But if they fuck around on yours, they get engagement.
Right. It's
And
funny
it
you
allows
say
them to
that.
be able to feel good, and it's all good. Everybody needs to feel good in the way they do, and it's just the problem is what we do is we dissuade people that don't like drama from entering our space. And I think that that's like the issue with cannabis. And you look at cannabis, and it's the same thing where, you know, cannabis was this extremely diverse industry, incredible amount of diversity in every aspect. And now when you take a look at it, it's almost no diversity. And I mean, there's no, I don't care what equity program they create, it's still run by basically a bunch of white guys like me. And even though I fall under the equity guideline, meaning multi-time fucking felon, it's just not fair. And then you take a look at the number of women that are in the industry, and it's minuscule. And so what you have is you have this filter that basically filters out people who want to get in, who don't want to deal with all your bullshit. And they just want to get into a new career. They thought that being in cannabis would be something positive, being around people in cannabis would be positive. But that's not the cannabis industry. That's cannabis consumption and then cultivation, meaning that you're your own cultivator. So if you're growing at your house and I'm growing at my house and Slava's doing it at his house, we can all have a conversation about growing and feel the goodness of it, because we're not trying to monetize that situation. But the minute you monetize it, all of a sudden it changes it dramatically, and the cannabis industry is a fucking mess. No diversity. It's not healthy, and you can see it because it's so narrow band in its overall width. We have a million different categories, but at the end of the day, it's a very limited selection, to be honest.
Kevin, a very simple question. Next season, what you're going to grow next season? You know, genetic wise. You know, because you obviously are a high profile guy for that. I'm really interested what you will say now. Like, what you are going to grow next season?
Let's see. Well, it depends. If I know what I'm going to do on my own, meaning like I have an Afghani cherry pie that I did some work on and went through and selected out a stunner. And I would love to see that as a rosin product hit the market, because it just threw down a product that just shakes you, like almost unpleasant level strength. So I'd love to see that get out into the public, because the people I smoked it with just loved it. But I'm lucky in that I can produce product without white label. So I can produce product that I don't have to sell. I can produce it for a company, but I get my name on the bag, right? So I work with Cookies on that, and I produce varieties that come out of the R&D facility, and then the team tells me what they would like to see produced, and I produce those products, and we turn those into fresh frozen, and they go into the cookie world as a cart. but it's a great relationship because it's my label on the bag. So it's not like I'm white label, and I'm actually getting the full credit for the product. And the ability to do that is pretty good.
For sure. I think only the most respected breeders and cultivators will get that honor, right? Like, because also putting your name on the bag is bringing up the brand at this point.
It's good for both parties. I mean, at the end of the day, you know, the farmers have a hard time getting their product into the store, and when I can produce a product and get it into the store, that's a success. Would I like to be able to just do what I want? Yeah, but at the end of the day, I'm a grower, so I grow what sells, and then I can work on some stuff that doesn't.
I have one question I want to ask you before we go, and then we do a wrap up. Okay. So one question I wanted to ask you was your thoughts on breeding and selection of males.
Yeah.
Because, and I'll just give you my quick feeling on it. I don't feel like I have the experience to choose a male. I think that for many people, I think it's a bit of undue arrogance that they have, that saying that they can select a male, because how do we really know when, like, a female, you can see it, you can smoke it in advance, you know what you got. A male, you're making your best guess. So for me, the best way to do breeding, and it's difficult, is, you know, if you have many males, you cross your females with them one at a time, and then you see what comes out from male 1, 2, 3, 4, as many as you can do.
That's the only way.
You know, but, you know, people are like, well, I did a stem rub, or I reversed this male and made it but it's like, how can that actually tell you what you're gonna get? I feel like choosing one male is arrogance.
It is if you're gonna select down to one, though, because sometimes one male is the only male that carries the traits that moves on into the progeny.
But that's after testing all of them, or many of them, right?
So for me, what I do is I look through the population of males, and if it's going to be open population preservation, I'm using every male I can.
Right.
But if it's trying to be selective, then I need to choose the males that have the traits of interest that I'm attracted to mostly, and then see, do they pass that forward? So sometimes, you know, you go to do, that's the problem, is that when you go to do breeding work, what we do is we chase current money, where we're like, oh, it's hot right now, let's do this. And the truth of it is that what we want is we want to be able to say, look, the thing that I'm working on has real value, period. Because now it takes away the time frame, and it lets you say, okay, it's going to take me a year and a half to really figure out what do I want to work with. And once you start to work with a line, you can start to notice that certain traits come along with it, where the plants that have these profiles seem to have this odd leaf anomaly. The plants that have this trait seem to also pass this trait on. So you'll start to see odds, a propensity for things to occur. But the only way you can determine anything at the end of the day is through testing the progeny. And that's where, you know, working on marker-assisted stuff is that they're going to say, look, this plant, we've identified the trait of interest. This is where it exists. If we can find it on this plant, that means that plant has the potential to pass it on. But if that trait doesn't exist in the plant, there's no ability to pass it on. And so most breeding is kind of, that's why I say it's kind of half-assed, because we don't go at it from this comprehensive view, but it doesn't mean that we haven't created some beautiful stuff. It's just we don't have a line. We have a cluster that we select from. And the goal is to be able to put as much into this line as possible so that when you fuck with the line, you get a large portion of that pretty desirable.
Right. Well,
Nice one.
I appreciate that response. And with that, I think we will wrap it up and let Kevin get to his family and to his plants. But I did want to say again, I don't feel like we've even scratched the surface of your story. So
we'll go back. Always, I got some guys I want to introduce to you too, man. I think I love your work, and I think that there's a ton of really quality people that would love to go. So we'll get back on it, brother.
Great, I appreciate
Happy holidays to both of you.
Okay. This episode of Gabbing with Gaby is brought to you by the Breeders Direct Seed Company. In my opinion, the Breeders Direct Seed Company is your premier source for clones and seeds, and they are the only place that you can get the Gaby Staten Island collection. So visit Breeders Direct for all your seed and clone needs.